Hello and welcome back to the Agent of History podcast. Whether you're listening as a podcast or watching it on YouTube, welcome back to this journey of exploration into these two questions of how did we break and how do we heal. And here I have conversations with people I call guides who can help us traverse the terrain that we need to traverse in order to uncover and develop answers to these two questions. And I am so delighted and honoured to have today as my guide someone who is a dear friend of mine, Manda Johnson. Manda was born and raised in the UK, but has spent pretty much her whole adult life in New Zealand. And she has been actively engaged in a process of inner transformation for 40 years now, central to which has been the ongoing restoration of her own trauma, which deeply informs the work that she does, whether that's in acupuncture, hypnotherapy, somatic therapy, psychodrama, working with both individuals and groups. Manda has been a big part of the Pocket Project, which was established and is led by Thomas Hubl, which is dedicated to the restoration of collective and intergenerational trauma. And within that, Manda has played a key role in developing what is called global social witnessing, a practice and a philosophy that she'll talk about in the conversation. And as part of that, she's co-initiating a world witnessing collective. In New Zealand, Manda is a facilitator of transformation for collective intelligence. And overall, her experience of living in intentional community for 20 years has helped her to develop a deep appreciation for and trust in the potential and the magic of the collective. This is a really great conversation with someone I have inexpressible love and admiration for. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Manda. Manda, it is a real honor and privilege for me that you've agreed, to come and do this interview, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. So welcome to this podcast, the Agent of History podcast.
Thank you, Joel. It's a pleasure, a delight to be here.
Oh,
Always delightful to be in conversation with you.
Oh, thank you. So, as you know, this podcast is a journey of exploration into these two questions of how did we break and how do we heal. And you and I have been working very, very closely, intimately, for quite a few years now in the field of and the practice of intergenerational collective trauma. So let's begin with this first question. How did we break?
Well, how did we break? That's an interesting kind of way to approach it. I fundamentally think we're in an evolutionary process. At the same time, we appear to have travelled and circuited what looks like kind of the same territory over and over and over for quite a long time now. And to me and there is some challenge to what I'm saying anyway, because actually it's different in different parts of the world and different communities. So there are indigenous communities who have held, you could say, sacred relationship with the earth and their spirituality right the way through to today. But the bigger impact on, you could say, the global community are the wounds of trauma acted out again and again and again, like a repetitive cycle, really, of what looks to me like denial, of wounding, resilience without depth of feeling that produces so many of the behaviours that continue to show up as harming, whether it's to the planet, whether it's to other people, the wars that we'll tolerate, the inequity that we will allow, to exist in life in the world, where many people are really disadvantaged and select few are really privileged and have a lot of possibility. Yeah, so how did we break? I think has a lot to do with extreme experiences that we find impossible to digest at the time. We weren't equipped to know how to manage the violence and the brutality that is actually woven through history, particularly in Europe and the Americas, and has been delivered from those places into the rest of the world.
Well, there are two streams here, obviously totally connected, but there's one which is crucial to differentiate, obviously, the we, and on the ultimate level, there is just a one we in humanity, of course. But of course, the historical process is very differentiated in terms of the we that has been breaking, and who the objects of that broken, and the agents of that breaking, and we can come to that in the context of structural violence of race and gender and colonialism and all of those things. But if we take a step back, essentially what I'm hearing you say is that though this is an evolutionary process, we are stuck in these cycles of pain and violence and trauma because we are ultimately unable to process the trauma that has been enacted in and through all of us. So the question then is, well, unless you'd like to take it another way, but like just for our listeners especially, what is trauma? What is trauma, and why can't we deal with it?
Trauma. Well, when you say, I think we haven't been equipped until now. So I think there's a lot that has happened in the last 50 years. So and you can see it travelling further back in time as kind of finer threads, really. But in the last 50 years, there's been a whole combination of increasing competence on many levels, whether it's communication, emotional literacy. Well, I suppose those two are kind of essential streams that are leading to a different possibility now. But previously, and habitually, even in my lifetime and in many people's lifetime, we have all sorts of sensitivity and needs that don't get met. And they don't get met when, for most of us in our childhood, and they don't get met socially, societally. We have ways of managing. And the ways of managing are to shut down to overwhelming experiences, basically, as to move away. At the time, it's an intelligent act to reduce something that is overwhelming to our system when we don't have the skills or the competence to manage it. So it's an intelligent act to close it and find ways, like the best way to survive a circumstance in a situation. And when I look back in history and I look at the stories that are told of well, for example, Britain, we're both British, so somehow I have a more attention there. But the history of Britain, there's 1,000 years of colonisation in its history. When you look back at the stories that are told, there are fields of blood and dead bodies, and we had a cultural practice of hanging people kind of brutalising them in the Tower of London. It's a place that I went as a child to somehow see British history. It's just littered with brutality and violence and cruelty. And when a whole population grows in that cultural norm, it can't be anything but overwhelming, and we have to find ways to reduce the impact and the effect of that.
Yeah, so essentially, I think one thing I'd like to emphasize here that I've learned with you, especially from Thomas Hubl, who's I know you're a student of, and I've studied a course of his as well and read his work, that this is really important to emphasize that actually this numbing of our nervous systems at the point of this initial experience of trauma, or the traumatization, is an intelligent, evolved response, because otherwise it's just overwhelm. And time, because of course, because trauma, so much of trauma is deeply ingrained in feelings of shame and inadequacy and all of these self-judgments, that actually I find it quite a liberating assertion to begin with, to say, actually, no, there's nothing wrong with you. In fact, this is a celebration of your embodied or bodily intelligence, that whether in your own lifetime or in your ancestral line, your body acted in this way to survive, to get through. But that doesn't take us away from the fact that this took us away essentially from love, because you talked about these needs, the needs that were not met in order for our bodies to have to do this. But the ultimate need, of course, is just to receive love. And so the point is that this initial moment of traumatization stays with us in this frozen way that then prevents our continued evolutionary emotional development.
Well, yes, a few things to say. I've increasingly come to the conclusion that trauma is the absence of love, or the way of managing trauma is love in its best version at the time.
Mm.
So,
you mean strategically, like? Yeah.
Yes, it's like how to take care in this moment. So, and that's the possibility. It's sort of, if you, this sounds a bit random, but I think about, you talked about the frozenness, and I think about the different states of water. Mm. So water can be frozen, it can be fluid, and it can be dispersed by in different states. It has a different form, and I think I've been contemplating, and this isn't a well-developed concept in a way, but I think that love has the same in a way possibility of taking different forms in how it's expressed. So when I just spoke to the absence of love when things get when there's trauma, and I think in the initial experience there is an absence of love, and then love takes a form of being frozen in time. That experience gets frozen in time. We find a way to carry on, but that experience gets frozen in time, and there's energy bound up in it. And to really evolve and move and actually create a future, that energy has to contribute back into life. It has to be available and part of our system. So every time there's trauma and it's not responded to other than to be held in time, then it reduces the available energy for life to emerge and evolve itself. So there's a real work to do to notice what's absent, notice what's frozen, to look to, and in a way we don't even have to look that hard. We just have to be present to what is and not look away. Because as soon as you start being present to what is and notice the ways that you can or can't feel, then you begin to create a possibility for those things to be known again and brought back into life in the world.
So before we because that we're moving into the kind of how do we heal, and we can dedicate a lot of time on that, just to also bring us back to this idea of, because obviously how did we break is a kind of retrospective question. How do we heal is a prospective, forward-looking question. And when it comes to this this field of trauma, and you were saying this exactly just now, which is, to the extent that we are traumatized is the extent to which this loving energy is frozen within us, is the extent to which we experience our lives retrospectively. We experience our lives stuck in an unhealed past, and then conversely, the extent to which we can be present to and process our trauma, and therefore kind of thaw out, to use your kind of water analogy, and come into an energy of healing, is the extent to which we can actually be present, and therefore present to the future that is emergent within us, and we can allow that loving future to emerge. Is that?
I think there's there's something in there that's speaking to the conditions of trauma. We all get born into it. We're born into a cultural norm that has all sorts of ways of managing the effects of trauma, in a way, you could say. And to some degree, we don't know ourselves. We don't actually know what's possible, because that's been normal. That's been what we know. That's and I think there's an essential kind of piece of coming to terms with the fact that where we're going isn't something that we can plan. So when I think of and this comes out of a combination of neuroscience and business studies, actually, but the work of David Rock, and he's got something that he calls SCARF, and he talks about, in the business workplace, the 5 main triggers of alarm. And the SCARF is an acronym for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And they're five you could say, principal effects in our nervous system. So when we're alerted, those things become kind of the highest priorities, and you can see those things woven into our societal structure and how we kind of represent ourselves and look after ourselves. So certainty is quite a high priority for a lot of people. And we kind of dress it up as having to have certain things, like a home, or maybe more than one home, or an accumulation of money, or a relationship at all costs. Yeah, so there's lots of ways that we make that a priority without really being sensitive to what are my actual needs around certainty. What are the real needs? We kind of, for as long as we're hyper aroused, or we're in a state of alarm, which I think societally we fundamentally have, even though we don't really realize it. We kind of walk around with an elevated state of hypervigilance and alarm. And it's not until you do practices that drop that level of alarm that you even notice that there's another way to a possibility of being. Yeah. So.
No, absolutely. Yeah. No, those resonate. So just to go through that acronym again, so it's status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And I see that in my life, in my life as a parent. It's not just obviously relevant to business circles, and I think that's a really useful acronym, and it says so much. And that we are triggered so much, and of course, I guess social media is another platform in which these fears are, played out. But generally as well, in terms of answering the question of how we broke, just of course our whole cultural model is there to both trigger these fears, because obviously these fears can lead us to, as you say, deploy strategies, and those strategies are invariably strategies of consumption in order to meet or unconsciously meet the real fundamental needs that those strategies are often actually detrimental to, rather than actually meeting them, or they meet them in a pseudo satisfying way, to use the language of human scale development. But and at the same time, so our culture is set up to actually press our buttons, our alarm buttons, and at the same time, of course, our culture is there to distract. And so it's a distraction machine that takes us away from being present in every moment. And I was going to use the word guilty, or I'm not going to judge myself. I'm immersed in the practice of distraction as all of us. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any claiming here of being different than that. And you could say that it's a system that's doing its very best to take care of those needs. It's just not very aware of the consequences of its way of doing that. And the consequences of its way of doing that is that it doesn't, as you say, it doesn't actually take care of the real need. It attempts to, it makes its best attempt, but it's not very effective at really creating the restoration that we're in a way naming at the moment.
I kind of I totally agree, but I also in a way disagree. So I agree in the sense of it there being like consciousness itself, and this low level of consciousness which is unaware of itself, and therefore unaware of its own fundamental needs. At the same time, of course, we can point to interest groups that are very aware of what they're doing. You know, I think of social media and how it's kind of, I don't know if it's actually true or apocryphal, but how, you know, the people who like design Facebook, who design other apps and stuff, like, you know, will not give it to, or the iPad will not give it to their kids, you know, or will not use it themselves, and because it's very carefully and consciously and intentionally designed to distract and to get us literally addicted to its interface, because you know, that can be monetized. You know, what do you call it? The attention economy can be monetized as well. So I think it's important to kind of bring the politics in there as well, which is that the way that our society, through here, obviously I'm thinking capitalism, literally structurally divides us, clearly then imposes structural, very real structural barriers towards us becoming present, becoming in the moment, even just having the time. Obviously, for most human beings right now, is very hard. So it's, I guess, important to emphasize those factors that you know, militate against our evolution. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yes. And the interesting thing is we get to see them so much more clearly in these times, and that in itself, it's a bit like, you know, Thomas talks about this, and I have really taken this on board, and that is one of the things that you know, when you speak about relief into one's nervous system. So Thomas talks about when something shows up that is really challenging or difficult, whether it's in your relationship or in society or in life, it isn't in the way, it is the way. So it is the thing to pay enough attention to get to understand it, like to get beneath how it shows up superficially, to not be reactive to it, but to look for, what does this have to teach me? What can I get to know that I don't know so far? And when I inquire in that way, as opposed to be reactive to, for example, the misuse of Facebook, or then I get to know clearly how vulnerable I am to that kind of manipulation, or can be, and therefore I can also become attentive to making sure that I don't fall into that trap, you could say. And I don't think that's any different than the way we all have in our lifetime have to negotiate one addiction or another, or different forms of addiction, and that becomes a way of becoming a more mature human being. So it's not that the addictions are, I mean, that of course addictions can be incredibly destructive and harming, but the negotiation that we have to make ourselves is actually a potential for growth and evolution of us as an individual in a much bigger collective field.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, the addiction, or the practices that I'm engaged in that ultimately harm me in whatever way, are precisely where I need to bring my attention, where I need to recognize that the addictive practices are attempts, just to bring it back to how we were framing this before, are attempts to meet needs that, you know, unconscious attempts, unconscious strategies to meet needs that are clearly that could be, to use your language from before, the best way that's available to me right now. But in order for me to ascertain that, I need to know what are my real needs, and what is my relationship with this technology or this substance or this person, helping me to understand about what I really need and who I really am, therefore. So I absolutely agree with that. Can you say that again? So it's not, they're not in the way, they are the way. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So difficulties, challenges, conflicts,
Yeah.
they're not in the way, they are the way.
Mm.
And if you approach, you can look at life and kind of see the different challenges that go on in your own life, and you can judge yourself for them, or you can react against them and try and fix them. But if you actually engage with them, then there is something in there that is really valuable to know about.
Yeah.
And invariably, if we really engage like that, there's almost always some piece of trauma that's involved. And that means there's a felt experience that wants to be known about. And if we can make space for that, then the structure that's shown up in life, the conflict, the accidents, the illness, or really often actually a bit like the ice we were talking about before, starts to slowly but surely change form, dissolve itself. And I become a more fluid internal structure myself at the same time. Yeah. So what's on the outside holds less gravity in a way, and I become more fluid internally as well.
Fluid. We're back to water again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, at this point, we've been speaking in not in abstract terms, but I'd like to just bring in a personal, example, just to kind of really frame it in the personal, that because we are two people who practice this, and what we practice, we'll come on to in the kind of second half of this conversation now. But for me, having worked with you in this group for over 3 years on intergenerational collective trauma, we can do exactly as you say. We can really, the more we are present with what we feel, just with what we feel in our bodies, in our systems, for me, it comes back, we peel layer after layer after layer, and some of that obviously precedes my own incarnation, my own life. But for me, it always comes back to these moments in my very early life where, and this is no judgment of my own parents, my own wonderful parents, but for whatever reason, I felt that I had to do something or be someone to get love, to be worthy of receiving love, rather than, and that in itself is not love. Love imposes no conditions. Love just is being with. So, there have been these moments of realization of healing, and they very much, and I know that this is the same for yourself, Manda, as well, that these moments in our early childhood where we did exactly what we've been talking about. There was a realization or a belief that we had to do something, that love was conditional essentially for us, and that we had to change our behavior, change our strategies in order to pursue it, in order to be worthy of it. And for me, that realization, well, firstly, that's not a lightning flash single realization. That's a learning and a forgetting and a remembering and a forgetting. But in that, ultimately, though, the journey is, forward, and it's a journey ultimately of coming to love oneself again, and accepting oneself just as one is, that becomes the foundation for loving anyone else, really. So I just wanted to share that, to ground it in personal experience.
Yes, well, you know, my own personal experience is born into trauma. There's trauma generationally for the generations that I know consciously about. So I only actually know 2 generations back, but I know 3 generations back to some degree. But there's trauma. There's, in my particular family line, there's a lot of absence of mothering, death of mothers, on both sides, and generationally, early death of mothers, or and that delivers something, a very particular experience, into my particular life. And yes, the hoops that the hoops that I learned to jump through in order to get the love I needed. I mean, I can see how I really did do the very best. And actually, the hoops that I learned to jump through, and the things that I practiced over and over and over again, have become a bit like superpowers in life now. But and I have I'm in my mid-60s now. I'm still unraveling pieces. I'm still unfreezing pieces. I've had a lifetime, really, of a journey of restoration. And I'm not sure that that's different for any of us in many ways, consciously or unconsciously. Yes, but for the superpower to really be of value, it has to be, I think, unhooked from the trauma. It has to actually not be about me trying to get the love I needed anymore. It just is a competence, a well-practiced competence that I can bring to life, and I can deliver generously because I'm skilled, really skilled at this particular way. Yeah.
So there's to be devil's advocate, before we move into the how do we heal, there's a prior question, which is why? Why? You're telling me you're in your mid-60s and you're still doing this. You're still basically willingly sitting with people and crying your heart out on a Sunday afternoon or whatever. It's well, why? And I think you began to answer that question. Actually, because this is a practice of freedom. This is a practice of responsibility for who I am, where I come from, coming to know myself, that I can actually fully bring myself into the world as myself. But yeah.
It's a hunger. It's a hunger, Joel. It's a hunger for, or a longing. You could say it's a hunger and a longing.
Or yearning.
For every step I take, I feel increasingly alive, increasingly joyful, increasingly capable of loving, increasingly heartbroken, and with a depth of felt experience. And all of that delivers increasingly intuitive. There's a increasingly able to, in a way, be less defined to this body, this moment, and increasingly able to travel through time and kind of get to know and experience certain things that have been, but also feel like I become a conduit to let light arrive into life in the world, and therefore help be part of creating a better future, a more enlivened, fluid, loving future. Yeah. So there's a fulfillment of something for every step I take. There's something where there is more to my experience of life, and I love that. So.
And it's also, we were talking about this the other day, the ancestral element about coming into relation and communication with our ancestors, and just honoring their sacrifices and our own personal self-actualization is actually their self-actualization.
Well, my more sort of beginning in some transformative experiences I made in my 30s, my ancestors started in a way talking to me and letting me know that I was a vehicle for their restoration in a way. And then that followed me through I did my dance training. So many of the works that I made when I went back to dance training in my mid-40s were really about giving movement to a whole lot of, in a way, stories that were carried in my body, but really generational stories coming down. And then most recently, I'm participating in some of the international labs that are part of the Pocket Project, which is a project designed for the restoration of collective and intergenerational trauma. And in one of those labs, we made a journey, and this might sound crazy to some people, but I literally made the experience of my ancestors finally, it's a bit like walking back into my body, and now they're here. It's like now they're here. And they came with such clear communication about, yep, you're strong enough now, you can hold all of it. You can hold all the pain, but you can also get all of our determination and our commitment to life, and and the living of it. So it's almost like I got a layer of my spine active that had never. There's an uprightness that I feel and experience from it. And there was such clear messages about walk the earth as your belonging. That's really the place of belonging. It's not whether I've got a house although of course we all need ways to take care of shelter and food, etc. But it's walk the earth as belonging. Know that as your belonging, and do no harm. It's like such clear messages.
Well, it just very tangentially, but it just reminds me of the Hebrew word Adam, like the first human being, literally means like from the earth, like we are of the earth. So it really resonates to walk the earth as as belonging, which is a very different, as you say, a very different way of being than having belongings. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
So if we move to this question of how we heal, there's one thing that I think is really important that I don't want to forget, which is that the way that we practice this is a practice of two dimensions. So there's this vertical dimension, this that Thomas Hubl calls an attunement or an alignment, that we And just the practice really is maybe easily said than done, but just being with our bodies, coming into our bodies, feeling our physical experience, feeling our emotional constitution, then coming up to kind of from a place, I've closed my eyes there, I realised I opened my eyes, of being in our body to then experience how our mental state is. And just noticing what is aligning, what is out of alignment. And then from that place, that's the vertical dimension. And then we come into a horizontal dimension. And that's really, really important to emphasize that this, of course, we can work by ourselves in this, but really this is a relational practice. And that's the horizontal dimension that we come in from this state of personal attunement into reaching out. And in Thomas's words, I feel you feeling me, you feel me feeling. And we can physically, in our bodies, feel each other's presence, feel the field, as Stina Durrell, who I recently interviewed, would put it, the embrace that exists between us. And it's that place that we begin as a foundation of true relationality. So it's really important to emphasize that the horizontal dimension, the relational, as fundamental to this practice of healing and realignment and being present. And love, because love is being present with. Mm.
Yes, love is being present with.
With, yeah.
And love is being present with whatever is. So whether it's numbness, whether it's connection, if I can be here and I can let you know that in this moment I feel numb, I don't know how to feel, then the very sharing of that openly, honestly, begins that relationality that then allows me to maybe drop just another layer and it's like allowing the numbness to inform me about itself, and then that opens other doors, really.
Yeah, that's really essential. For anybody who is listening to this or watching this that is intrigued and feels that they have a need, a yearning for this work. Of course, taking it back to how we describe trauma or the process of the experience of traumatization as a numbing, then of course it's not going to be surprising to find maybe that the most superficial layers are layers that translate themselves in our bodies as exactly that, as experiences of numbing, or lostness, maybe associated with visual experiences of blackness, really like experience, and can be very, very upsetting and distressing and but it's very important to name that. And as you say, the practice of naming itself can be is the beginning.
I think there's different things. Trauma in itself separates. Like, so much trauma happens when there's a rupture of relatedness. One way or another, whether it's neglect or whether it's violence, but it's almost it's invariably of course there are traumatic events, but they almost always deliver an experience of separation and isolation. And we manage that in different ways. So we can manage it by actually becoming overactive and hyperactive. One of the when you think about fight-flight, which is a system of the body to manage stressors, then one of the ways to manage stress is, and you can say fight-flight, the flight part is to mobilize and get busy and active. So you can see that there are many ways that we keep moving in order to not have a felt experience. So that's and we can get very isolated in that fullness of activity. And then the other way is what you were just referring to is to go numb, but there's also numbing. There's also completely disassociating. So we can actually appear to still be here, functioning, doing things, just sort of in a way lifted up out of our own body. But if we're with another, if they're in some way listening to their experience, they'll know that we're not there. And we register those things all the time subliminally. We know when people are available and relating. We know when another is absent. We tend to not know so well our own absence because it's very familiar as a way of managing life and relationships. But once we bring those things to a conscious awareness, like we can start to think, a cognitive awareness, should I say, we can start to think about, oh, is that me? Then we can start to pay attention to the subtle in our system, what's called the interoception, which is the layer of sensitivity that is a bodily experience before it becomes feeling. So we can explore our subtle inner experience, which has so much information, and then that gives us much more information about what we're actually feeling, and then lets us be in relationship with another person with that information. And that, so my something that is really delightful to me is when another can say to me, where are you? Where are you at the moment? And that gives me the chance to kind of go, oh, I might say, oh, I'm just cooking dinner, or I'm just cleaning up. But really, if I drop down another layer of sensing in myself, I realize that there might have been something just happened in my relationship with that person where I got frightened. And I'm just managing my fear.
Well, we come back to that acronym of SCARF. It might be helpful at that moment. Which of the letters is operating
Yes.
for me right now?
Yes. And of course I have particular sensitivities around autonomy and certainty and status, I think. Oh, relatedness isn't, it's like they all go off they all ping my system, actually.
Yeah, I think I'm relatedness and fairness, I think. And of course certainty is there for all of us. It's all there. I wonder, as we could, for people who are experiencing and hopefully enjoying this conversation, how can they begin? How can they begin to do this work? That's more of a practical thing. Like where can they go? Maybe you can share more about well, two things. Obviously, the work with Thomas Hubl's Pocket Project, and also within that, your work on global social witnessing, and just maybe like a warm invitation to people who can reach out. And one thing that also we could add to that is what we haven't spoken about yet, which is, I know, so dear to your heart, which is issues of race and coloniality and gender, and how they have a place, a really integral, central place in your work and in the work of the Pocket Project and global social witnessing.
Well, as a segue to those things, I'm just going to come back to your comment earlier, which is about our collectivism, I could say. So, in terms of ways to heal and restore ourselves, there's things that we can do personally. We can cultivate practice that invites us to self-reflect, to get to know, to become attuned. And, you know, practices that do that, they're many and myriad, but probably what's, you know, and you find what delivers the best experience to you. But meditation, walking meditation if you can't sit still, yoga, there's many Tai Chi, there's many practices that help us know ourselves in a way. And then of course there's the layers of where we can build competence and capacity in relationships. So in therapy, in friendships that are committed to presencing what is in the moment, and there are an increasing number of deliberate practices that are dyad practices of just being with, and growing that capacity to notice ourselves and what actually happens, as you say, in our felt experience, in our interiority, and our felt experience both bodily, but emotionally and cognitively. And when those things start to line up, we also develop a relationship with space. You know, you spoke about verticality, and there are ways that we can just open ourselves vertically, so we can feel the earth. We can open to the earth beneath us, but we can open to you could say the light above us, and inhabit alongside our interiority, inhabit a place of spaciousness. So just naming those sort of personal practices. But what I really wanted to refer to, and that goes back to something that you said that I didn't really speak to before, which is about the collective. And, you know, the statement of we are ultimately and fundamentally one is increasingly kind of recognised. But then there's the physical reality of us as individuals. And there is, in my experience, there are parts of our restoration that we simply cannot do alone, that simply are a collective endeavour, that we have to get to know ourselves in groups. We have to get to know what that is to have a collective nervous system, and we can begin to know that by practicing in smaller, intimate groups. And then we can also extend into, if we take the personal practices of being able to notice our inner experience into collective experiences, whether that's small groups and then increasingly larger groups, we start to recognize that we become alive in certain ways in those configurations, in those environments that aren't possible when I'm alone. Or maybe once we know them in groups, we can become increasingly sensitive to our collective body without being in presence, the actual experience in the moment. We can be attuned in every moment to our much more extended collective nervous system.
So the images that are coming to me. No, the images that are coming to me are of a reweaving. That ultimately we are one strand in the collective fabric. So we're very knotted and frayed and all of that, but ultimately there's a reweaving and a re-feeling of ourselves as collective individuals, and a capacity to feel the oneness, the wholeness, the system itself.
Yes, yes, and that is thrilling. Like my small experience of that, and kind of growing into it. It's thrilling and delightful and relieving and encouraging. Yes, kind of there's many layers to it. Yeah, so, to come to the work of global social witnessing and the Pocket Project, I think the Pocket Project is a non-for-profit that is, as I said before, committed to the restoration of collective and intergenerational trauma. And it's initiated by Thomas Hubl and his wife, Judith Sasporas. And it's growing itself. It's it has an online presence, so you can find it at pocketproject.org. Currently, it's running a series of international labs that all have different focuses. So there are focuses of colonization of Europe and the colonization activities of Europe into Africa. There's women and gender trauma. There's war and its impacts on families, and many others. There's living on indigenous land, and trauma. And you can see them all. They're listed on the Pocket Project website. And that round is closed. You can't kind of join. Each of those labs has a closed body of people who are participating. And there's a level of research happening around those labs, because you could say they are an emergent form of collective healing. And we're all learning in the process, whether we are a participant or whether we're a facilitator or a trainee. And there is a very genuine acknowledgement of a learning process. And there will be a next round of those labs in what is, Northern Hemisphere fall and Southern Hemisphere spring. And you can, when those open, you can apply to participate in those things. Generally, so far as I can tell, those labs require a level of competence person competence to actually be able to be with one's own inner experience and to be capable to allow others' experience to arise in oneself without being overwhelmed by it. And so that suggests a level of capacity for introspection and really a familiarity with some level of presencing through meditation or a witnessing practice. So that brings me to global social witnessing. I participated in the first training that the Pocket Project offered in collective and intergenerational trauma, which began in 2017. And when it completed in 2018, a number of, there were 149 people and from 39 different countries, and a good body of those graduates continued to make explorations in different ways and forms, basically to continue their own kind of healing and restoration with other people who are committed to those practices. And we kind of explored along themes of the muted voice or research 2.0 as developing research models that are different than classic research forms, or colonialism, or healing through art. A whole series, circles of support, developing forms of circles of support for different projects. And so all of those continued, and global social witnessing was one of those. So global social witnessing is a practice that was, you could say, named as a form at the Celebrate Life Festival in Germany in 2017. And from then on, the group of people who were mostly graduates from the Pocket Project training met regularly and always had a focus towards a world event. So, we are exposed through media, global media, and through our interconnectivity these days to world events and to an extraordinary extent. And unless we actually slow down and pay attention, we can consume a lot of world events and really actually ignore to notice what the impact of those events actually is, either on ourselves or on the people who are there within those events. So global social witnessing is designed as a practice to give more time, space, and availability to actually feel how those events impact me, and for me to witness other people and how it shows up in them, and to allow that to also be felt, if it's possible, within my own system, or for me to know my own limits if it's not possible. So we've continued to have global social witnessing events every 2 weeks until the Pocket Project in the last month, started in March, has begun to create an open session once a month, which myself and the other people who initiated the global social witnessing, what we call the Coherence Centre, that now exists within the Pocket Project itself. We host those sessions along with another senior facilitator of Thomas's field, and they're open to anybody who wants to sign up to them. So you can find that information on pocketproject.org. So the Pocket Project hosts one session of global social witnessing and one session of basically a community presencing of whatever is alive in people.
Wow, there's lots there. So yeah, no, there's so really people can go to pocketproject.org to learn more and obviously to learn how to get involved.
Yes.
And
there's two other layers that I'll speak to, Joel, and one is myself and Christine Gericke and Robert Buxbaum are basically finally putting together a platform online called under the title of World Witnessing. So that will be up in the next month or so. And then there is also, for people who that practice might appeal to, there is a Masters of Global Social Witnessing, which has just established itself in Ubiquity University. So Robert, Christine and myself are teaching the practice part of that master's program. And it's open to people. You don't have to actually sign up to the masters to do some of those electives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's another way. We'll be teaching a six-week program, which is about the practice of global social witnessing, which would introduce the competencies that are required to be able to witness well. So, and then take people into warming up to global social witnessing practice itself and deepening into that practice over time.
And when does that begin? When does that
emergent field?
When does that when does that 6-week course begin?
That actually begins in May.
In May. Okay, so if you're listening to this before May, which is not that long way, then you can go to either Pocket Project or you can go to Ubiquity University to sign up.
Yeah, and have a look at it's under a master's, but you can sign up to different parts of the program anyway. Okay.
Let's leave it there, Manda. I'm so honoured and so grateful. I think you shed light on these two questions in such rich, infinitely rich ways. By which I mean, the more that we practice this, the deeper and deeper we go to come to know what it is to be myself and what it is to be a human being. And I'm so grateful to be on that journey with you. So thank you so much for your time today.
It's a privilege and an honour. Thank you so much, Joel.
Thank you.